So Giulia Bazoli, so you are UX lead at Designit.
Yes.
And more than 10 years of experience in user design and involvement. I think even though there's this UDOS post now, I think we'll be really interested to hear your presentation. Very happy you could join us today. And we will come alive soon, I hope. Yeah. So I leave the floor to you. There you are.
Yes, thank you so much. Sorry, I was glancing at you, but also setting up. But thanks so much for the introduction. And hello, everyone. It's such a pleasure to be here. And yes, my name is Giulia Bazoli. I am a user experience lead and a diversity, equity, and inclusion champion at Designit Oslo. And together with Dr. Pardis Shafafi, who is a strategic design lead and head of sustainability, also at Designit Oslo, we thought a lot about do no harm. And this is because Pardis and I have both experience in applying do no harm in our work. We have worked for many years as design researchers. Pardis is also a trained nurse and has worked in the humanitarian sector for many years. And I've been collaborating with various NGOs to support people in vulnerable situations, like refugees and people in domestic abusive relationships. So it's normal to bring kind of do no harm in the work that we do. But let's start with where do no harm comes from and what it means. So do no harm comes from the Hippocratic Oath, which is the vow to ethics historically taken by healthcare physicians. And the oath says, the physician must be able to tell the antecedents, so what happened in the past, know the present, and foretell the future. Must mediate these things and have two special objects in view with regard to disease, namely to do good or to do no harm. And I know the language is a bit funny because it's a translation from Old Greek, which I haven't translated it myself, someone else done it. But basically it means to not expose people to additional risks through our actions and to take a step back before an intervention to look at the broader context, understand it better, and be able to mitigate potential negative effects that might occur on the social fabric, on the economy, and on the environment. But when we start talking about harm, what do we mean by harm? This is just very much an initial list. It's not exhaustive at all, but we can think in terms of physical harm, psychological harm, societal harm. And when we also apply harm across a time axis, we also understand that could be immediate harm or longer-term harm. Immediate harm is when there is an intervention and something harmful happens right there and then, while longer-term harm, it's when something harmful happens and afterwards, that there has been an intervention or an interaction. And harm could be individual or collective, which takes us to reflect who could be a recipient of harm. We have direct or indirect beneficiary or users. It could be a community, it could be an organization, it could be an industry, but also the natural environment can be a recipient of harm. But something extremely important to clear out is that do no harm, it's not a blocker. It doesn't mean to do nothing, because to do nothing can also be harmful and dangerous in itself. It's not about disengaging. Do no harm means identifying risks that could arise and happen in a specific situation and come up with appropriate measures, which could be preemptive, immediate, or longer term. Sorry. But yeah, measures that could be preemptive are actions that we put in place before an intervention takes place. Immediate measures are actions that take place while the intervention is taking place, and longer term is measures that we put in place to handle after the intervention has taken place. So these measures are supposed to counterbalance the potential risks that we identified first. So to put Do No Harm in action, so you understand a little bit more what I'm talking about, this is an example of a project where Pardis and I have worked. So we can really show the risks that we identified and the measures that we put together. So in this specific project, the goal was to... Thank you. Thanks a lot. I also have it, but I'm covered. In this specific project, the goal was to provide undocumented women with the best reproductive healthcare service here in Oslo. We collaborated with a health center that support undocumented people with healthcare. And the methods that we wanted to carry out to run research was a combination of desk research, contextual research at the health center, and in-depth interviews with various stakeholders. So the risks that we identified from the very start were tied to the target group, which are in a vulnerable situation due to many factors, which could be possible poor physical health, possible poor psychological health, having to change often where they stay, not being able to necessarily move freely. But most importantly, is due to their legal status, because if they're found being without paper, they might face deportation. And so as responsible researchers and designers, it was key to find a way to both get the user perspective, but without putting them in danger, and exposing them to unwanted attention, which is the definition of having two people asking you personal questions. So the measure we put in place was to design the entire research process from the start to avoid interacting directly with undocumented women. And so we relied on triangulating sources to access data so that we could continue the process, but without endangering the user. So we started with desk research to gather information from various papers about the experience of migrants and undocumented people arriving to new countries. We involved expert users to represent the policy perspectives, specifically around reproductive health in Norway. We, of course, include the health personnel so that they could share with us their perspective on the combined experiences of patients that they face day to day. And we relied on proxy users to have their perspective more on the ground. And proxy users are people that are not actually your users, but share some characteristics or some kind of experiences that are kind of similar to your end users. So in our case was, for example, undocumented migrants whose status has now changed. So they're not as, it's not as dangerous to speak with us. And this is just one example, but actually in Designit, we have applied Do No Harm across a diversity of projects from the very beginning or specifically at a research phase across private and public sectors. But when we look more closely about kind of how Do No Harm connects with design, there are a lot of reasons why these two things should be more connected. First of all, because design is a huge act of power. As designers, we craft products, services, and systems that impact everyone in society. So we have to be aware of our privilege and responsibilities towards the system we design with, and being aware of our biases, because of course we have them, and who we might be excluding with our solutions and throughout the design process. Design is often linked to profit. We are part of and contribute to an economic system of inequity. So we have to be intentional in both maintaining an ethical approach while still functioning within our roles. Also, we need to consider the implications of designing with. As designers, we engage often directly with users in contextual interviews, co-creation sessions. So we have to be considerate in how we involve them to avoid extracting data from them and discard them once we have the data, or worse, re-traumatizing users by asking insensitive or triggering questions. Designit is not a sprint. The design sector has, of course, been helped a lot by players like Google and Facebook to get to the important role that we have nowadays. But at the same time, it is continually impacted by the Silicon Valley's mantra of move fast and break things, which has led to big issues in society that we're still trying to reckon with, like echo chambers, political polarization, addiction to social media, dark patterns in digital interfaces. This is getting dark, but it's going to get lighter after, I swear. So because we are dealing with these complex issues and more complex issues are going to rise in the future, we need to understand that these take time. And as designers, we need to start assessing these more nuanced and complex ethical discussions, like artificial intelligence application in society. So how algorithms get to decide whether a person will get a loan or will go to prison. Or how maybe robots might be used in healthcare to limit patients' loneliness, but on the other hand, hindering at how we relate with people that need support in society. So it's important to remember that these matters, these complex issues, take patience and continued effort to be designed properly. And nevertheless, all the power we have as designers, we have quite little or no accountability. Unlike healthcare, we don't have a shared set of ethical guidelines which can hold the practice accountable and towards designing responsibly. So to support practitioners and design practitioners to start thinking on how to apply do no harm lens practically in our day-to-day work, Pardis and I are developing a do no harm framework for design. And it's a prototype, at the moment shaped as a two-parts workshop. It might change its shape. But in the first part, we give an introduction around do no harm and why it should be connected with design, very much about kind of similar content that I just took you through now. But then we spend a lot of time in really understanding the do no harm building blocks, which is how to recognize a risk, meaning that when we are in front of a situation or a project, we see the potential issues that might occur, and then we put in place measures so that we can counterbalance them, as we were saying earlier. While in the second part of the workshop, we created a practical guidance in the shape of questions, reflections, on how to apply do no harm throughout the design process. And as you can see here, there are also exercises and examples to put them straight into practice. So for each of these aspects within the design work we do, we come up with questions to be explored individually or together in the team at the beginning of the project or throughout, depending on the need and depending on the length of the project, the client or partner you're working with. So to really be aware of how we can bring do no harms in looking at our team, for example, and maybe challenging the brief together with the client in understanding whether we are assessing the symptoms or the root cause, in drafting a proper research plan, in making sure that we gather data and we know why we're gathering a certain type of data, in how we translate insights into concepts, what type of technology we use, so that we can be more responsible across business plan and supply chain, considering the solution that we're putting into the world, and how we talk about the stories that we heard from users throughout the process, and how we market the solution at the very end. And I think that by having all this structure, ideally, it should push practitioners and designers to really actively reflect around do no harm and the work that we do. And just to give you an example, I'll show you some of the guiding questions we have for research and solution. And of course, research is a massive term, so we have multiple set of questions covering, for example, how to run research rigorously and involving people safely. But this specific set of questions is about recruitment, because if we are able to involve a diverse set of voices from the very start, it's going to be beneficial later on. And these are questions that we see the team, together with the client, to reflect together upon it. Starting with what diversity of experiences and needs are key to involve because relevant in your project. What are direct and indirect users of your interventions? How can you safely add perspectives of people you may not be able to talk with directly? And who are you excluding in this process and why? And I think it's important to be intentional about this and know why we're doing it. And if we switch to, when we switch under the solution, we really want to push to designers and practitioners to think about consequences of what we put into the world, since we've seen that they can be quite harmful in itself. So we ask what potential physical, emotional, and societal harm could occur while interacting with the specific solution, what potential harm could happen immediately, and what in the long term. What's the worst case scenario and for who? And what could happen if a big part of society would use the solution? How would impact everyone? So we really want this do no harm framework for design to advocate for responsibility and accountability, so that as designers, our intent and impact can actually be aligned. And of course, this set of questions are questions. They're just a tool. But actually, the final goal is that as designers, we need to cultivate a do no harm mindset, so that we can be critical and reflective towards ourselves, towards our discipline, but also in projects and with clients, so that we can be more intentional in what we do. So we've started spreading this work a bit around. We ran internal workshops at Designit, and we held lectures at AHU, School of Visual Arts in New York, and Politecnico di Milano. And of course, we're looking for partners and clients to test it with. And as I said, we are at the beginning of it, and I'm sure that you all have a lot of experience in bringing and considering ethics in your work and practice. So we want to know your thoughts about it. So thanks for listening, and let's stay in touch.